Well, let's talk a little more about this with Joe Siracusa, a professor of security and diplomacy at Curtin University in Australia, joining us from Melbourne. Good to have you as well. So we see now Russia taking over the largest nuclear facility in Europe. Virtually every time we hear from the foreign minister of Russia or the president, they're mentioning the potential for a nuclear aspect to this conflict if it continues. Is this an escalation?
Good morning, Michelle. Well, yes, it is, as a matter of fact. Look, there's a really good reason why the Russians want that nuclear power plant. There are 5 or 6 nuclear reactors there, and they want to make sure their own people don't blow up the reactor, and they want to make very sure the Ukrainians don't blow up one of those to get worldwide sympathy. I mean, President Zelenskyy has already said the reactor is under attack in Europe, is finished, we'll have to migrate somewhere. Well, that's not exactly true. Grabbing that those nuclear power plants to make sure that the reactors are okay is part of President Putin's, obviously, his insurance policy. I mean, the man is reckless, but he's not stupid. He's not going to create a Chernobyl on his doorstep. So I think there's a bit of theater going on about why people are trying to take it. And and at the end, if the Ukrainians are about to lose, someone might just blow up a reactor and blame it on someone else. This happens all the time in war. But you're right about the nuclear aspect. I've been writing about nuclear weapons and nuclear strategy for about 50 years. And I can tell you this, that the nuclear past is not dead, and it's not even past. People think about these things all the time. Now, I want you to keep in mind something that we don't talk about in the media, and that is, as far as Vladimir Putin is concerned, he is at war with Europe, the whole of Europe. Those sanctions, and they threw everything at him, like some rockets coming from nowhere. Those sanctions are acts of war in themselves. As far as Putin's concerned, he's done talking to Europe. Now, Europe has 449 million people. Russia has 149 million people. There's 67 million people in the UK and 330 million people in the United States. I mean, Putin can see that he's going to be outgunned and outnumbered very, very quickly. And he will do what the Americans did during the entire Cold War. He will use nuclear weapons, or threaten to use nuclear weapons, as a strategy called the Great Equalizer. The United States was always outnumbered and outmanned during the Cold War, so it threatened to use nuclear weapons all the time. And Putin has a number of tactical nuclear weapons, which I think he would call on very easily. There are maybe a couple thousand pounds of TNT. Keep in mind, the big ones are measured in millions of tons in TNT. The one dropped in Hiroshima was 14,000 tons of TNT. And of course, part of Russian doctrine right now, and I've heard about it for years from top Russians and Americans who accept it, they use a policy, or they use a doctrine called accelerate or escalate to de-escalate. The theory is that they will use a nuclear weapon, a tactical nuclear weapon, to signal they are standing down. Now, Michelle, I don't know where you're from, but I'm from Chicago. Someone uses a nuclear weapon in my neighborhood, it doesn't mean they're going to de-escalate. It means they're going to clobber you the next time. This doctrine is silly. Everybody accepts it, and I don't believe a damn word of it. But the Russians believe it. They think that if they bring it up a notch, and I don't put it past them to use a tactical nuclear weapon. They have thousands of them that we have never counted during the Cold War. We only count the big ones, as a matter of fact. And if they feel they have to do that, I think Putin feels that he's at war with nearly the whole world. And so I think he's reserving the right for himself to do whatever he wants, particularly to use nuclear weapons as the great equalizer.
Of course, that's the big worry. And because of that, nobody, leaders in the West and the United States, they don't want to talk about this. They certainly don't want to goad Putin into doing that. That's why they're very carefully, very slowly ratcheting up the sanctions in the hopes that it will make Putin reconsider. But how realistic is the assessment, do you think? Do Western leaders believe at this point that Putin is somebody that has nothing left to lose and he is just going to go for broke here?
I think some of these sanctions are nuts. They're actually trying to bring down the Russian economy bring down the Russian people. I mean, some of these sanctions wouldn't touch Putin for years, but it'll touch everybody else. He regards them, these sanctions are very serious, and he regards them as acts of war. I mean, when we embargoed the Japanese oil in 1941, they attacked Pearl Harbor 1 month later. I mean, that's how seriously nations take these sanctions. They regard them as arrows to the heart. So this idea of sanctions is okay. I mean, that's a kind of touch football game. We don't have to worry about the pro game. That's ridiculous. And I think we haven't thought this through. Right now in the United States, in the State Department, no one is allowed to talk to a Russian diplomat without permission from the Secretary of State. We've closed the corridor. We've closed the dialogue. We're not answering the phones. We're not talking to anybody. I mean, we are talking ourselves right into a very dark place. And I really don't think this is the way to roll on this kind of thing. But Putin's got to be taken seriously. I would say to him, look, you got 6,000 nuclear weapons. I'm going to listen very carefully to what your basic complaints are. But I want you to know that I have 6,000 nuclear weapons. And so you have to listen to me, too. I mean, he may have to cool it, but we have to threaten them. And Joe Biden has made it very clear for the last couple months, the United States is not going to threaten to use nuclear weapons. It's not going to put a boot on the ground in Ukraine. So in that sense, Putin has always had a free kick at Ukraine, so he knows that's not going to happen. The United States is on tenterhooks about even talking about nuclear weapons. Yeah. I heard today they're not going to have a launch, and that kind of a gentleness doesn't go very far. I mean, John Kennedy made it very clear. He said, if you launch a weapon from Cuba, I'll regard that as an attack on the United States from the Soviet Union, and that's the end of the game. So we're not threatening anybody, but Putin, as we push him more and more into a corner, as he becomes more desperate, and he will become more isolated, I would think he would reach for a tactical nuclear weapon in the sense of a limited, controlled nuclear war. And that's the problem, Michelle. There ain't no such thing. No one believes there can be a controlled nuclear war, because once you get one nuclear weapon, it's all out of the camp.
Absolutely. Joe, always great to hear from you. Thanks so much.